Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take complex sources, unpack them, and pull out the key insights for you.
Basically getting you up to speed quickly on important research and ideas. We do the heavy lifting, you get the core takeaways.
And today we're tackling a really big one, creative destruction. It's fundamental to how our economy functions, really. We're mostly drawing on a significant recent book on this by Philippe Aghion and his co-authors.
Right. It's a deep look at this idea that innovation constantly disrupts the old industries, old jobs, old tech replacing it with the new.
And their argument isn't just that this happens, but that it's the actual engine of capitalist growth.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, it's messy. It creates challenges. They're not anti-capitalism, the authors.
No, far from it. They're arguing for a better capitalism.
Yeah.
One where we actively manage this whole process.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. Break down what this book says about how creative destruction works, its effects, good and bad, and how things like institutions, policy, the state, markets, civil society, how they all interact to shape it.
And you should care because, well, this touches almost everything. Your job, maybe future jobs, inequality, even the environment, how whole countries compete. It's happening all around us.
Okay, so let's nail down the concept itself. Creative destruction. What is it, simply?
At its heart, it's new innovations making old ones obsolete. Think cars replacing horse buggies, computers replacing typewriters.
Right. And that immediately sets up a conflict, doesn't it, between the established way, the old, and the disruptive new.
Yeah, and the book points out this central dilemma. To get innovation, you need to reward the innovators, right? Because it's risky. These rewards, these extra profits, are sometimes called rents.
You need that incentive, that carrot. But here's the twist.
The twist is that yesterday's winners, the ones who got those rents.
Exactly. They now have the power, the resources, maybe even the political connections to try and block the next wave of innovation, to protect their position.
Which kind of sounds like Schumpeter, who coined the term. He was a bit pessimistic, wasn't he? Thought the system might choke on its own success.
He was. Schumpeter worried that the capitalists, the incumbents, would inevitably succeed in stopping the very process that made the system dynamic, that capitalism couldn't save itself from this tendency.
But these authors, they push back on that. That's central to their book. They think it is possible to manage this.
Yes, they argue you can regulate things, set up institutions to keep the innovation flowing without letting incumbents block everything, sort of saving capitalism from the capitalists, as they put it.
And you see the positive side, the dynamism, when you look at where jobs actually come from.
Oh, the data on this is striking. The book points to, I think it's table 1.1. In the U.S. in 2005, net job creation. It wasn't the big established firms.
No. Who was it then?
It was overwhelmingly young firms, startups basically. Firms that were 0 years old accounted for something like 142% of net job creation.
Wait, 142%? How's that possible?
Well, because older established firms in aggregate were actually shedding jobs. Net job destruction was happening there. The new firms were creating so many jobs, they more than offset those losses and drove all the net growth.
Wow. So the action is really with the new entrants. That completely changes how you might think about economic policy.
Absolutely. It highlights the importance of enabling new businesses to start and grow. Okay, let's step back. How does this look over, say, the long sweep of history?
The book uses Angus Madison's work here. Incredible stuff. He showed that real, sustained growth in living standards in GDP per person. It's unbelievably recent.
Like barely noticeable for centuries, right?
Exactly, just tiny bumps. Then around 1820, maybe a bit earlier, things just take off, the Industrial Revolution.
And the book argues this wasn't just about inventing things, but a new kind of interaction. Science and technology started feeding off each other.
Right, like advances in math leading to Newton's laws, which then help engineers build better stuff, and the problems engineers faced push science forward. A feedback loop.
And this sustained takeoff needed a few key ingredients, according to the source. One was knowledge spreading more easily.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another was competition between nations, pushing them to adopt new things. And crucially, institutions that protected property rights.
Ah, institutions again, like the patent system.
Precisely. The patent system was ingenious, they argue. It gave innovators that temporary monopoly, that rent as an incentive, but
But it also forced them to publish how the invention worked.
yes, that diffusion of knowledge is key. It let others learn and build on it. Totally different from, say, Venice trying to keep its glass-making secrets locked up forever. Patents encouraged sharing, in a way.
The source also talks about general-purpose technologies, GPTs. These are the really big ones.
Yeah, things like steam power, electricity, IT, they're foundational. They don't just improve one thing, they unlock innovation across tons of sectors.
And they spread in a particular way?
Uh-huh. It follows this S-shaped curve, like an epidemic almost. Starts slow, then accelerates really fast as people figure it out and adopt it, then levels off.
Yeah.
There's a figure in the book, 3.3, showing electricity replacing steam in U.S. factories took decades, followed that S-curve.
And these GPTs really fuel creative destruction because the new companies have an advantage.
A huge advantage. They can build everything around the new GPT from scratch. The old companies, they're stuck with the old tech, the old ways, and switching is expensive and disruptive for them.
So more churn.
Exactly. The diffusion of electricity and later IT lines up with periods of higher firm entry and exit. More competition, faster creative destruction.
Okay, so that naturally leads us to the impacts, the
Yeah.
good, the bad. Let's start with the upsides. Growth seems like the big one.
Absolutely. The book consistently links higher rates of creative destruction, more firm entry and exit with faster productivity growth. It really is the engine driving living standards up over the long run.
And jobs. We mentioned the young firms creating jobs.
Right. While some jobs are destroyed, others are created. Plus, there's what they call a capitalization effect. Basically, higher innovation leads to higher growth overall, which makes the whole economy bigger and creates more opportunities to start new things, hire people.
So that old fear, the machines are taking all the jobs. It's more complicated.
It's definitely more complicated. The Luddites smashing machines, William Lee facing opposition to his knitting machines centuries ago, those fears were real. Specific jobs were lost. But the overall pie grew. More efficient production eventually led to new kinds of work and higher wealth overall.
The book also mentions social mobility.
Yeah, there's a positive link there too. Innovative firms, often needing new skills and maybe being more meritocratic, can be pathways for people to move up. Figure 5.6 apparently shows a correlation between innovation in a region and higher social mobility. Training people, promoting from within.
Okay, but it's not all sunshine and roses. There are definite downsides.
Big ones. The most obvious is job insecurity. The destruction part is real and it hurts people.
And creates anxiety.
A lot of it. Figure 11.5 connects creative destruction directly to a higher chance of losing your job and increased economic anxiety across the board. It's not just the income loss, it's skills becoming obsolete, loss of status. It's tough.
What about inequality? Does innovation make it worse?
It can, especially at the very top. Think tech billionaires. States or regions with more innovation often show a higher share of income going to the top 1%.
But the authors make a distinction here, right?
A really important one. They argue that while innovation can increase top-end inequality, other things are much worse for overall inequality and economic growth.
Like what?
Like incumbents using lobbying or regulations to block competition. That also increases inequality, but unlike innovation, it actively hurts growth by stifling dynamism. So managing innovation's inequality impact is needed, but blocking competition is worse.
Then there's the environment. Established firms don't just jump to green tech.
Not usually, no. Path dependency, they call it. If you're Ford or GM and you spend 100 years perfecting combustion engines, you're going to keep tweaking those. Switching to electric. That's a massive, risky shift. Often takes government policy incentives or regulations to push that kind of green innovation.
And lastly, this idea of the middle income trap. What's that about?
It's fascinating. Countries can grow fast for a while by copying technology or just investing more capital, but to get truly rich, they need to shift to growth driven by their own innovation.
And some get stuck.
Yeah, like Argentina, maybe Japan for a period. They fail to make that transition. And often the book argues it's because the powerful companies that benefited from the old model resist the changes needed for the new innovation-based model.
They block the creative destruction that would challenge them.
Exactly. There's a chart, figure 7.14, comparing productivity in India versus the US. India has this bulge of low productivity firms that haven't been swept away. Sometimes, oddly, a crisis can break the logjam. South Korea's 1997-98 crisis weakened the big conglomerates, the chaebols, and actually spurred innovation elsewhere in the economy. Figure 7.15 shows that.
Okay, so given all these challenges, job losses, anxiety, inequality, environmental issues, getting stuck, how do we actually manage this? How do we get to that better capitalism the book talks about?
Right, this is the core of their policy argument. It's about finding the right balance and using the right tools. Take competition and intellectual property, like patents.
They seem like opposites. Competition reduces profits, patents create them.
On the surface, yeah. But the book argues that for firms right at the cutting edge, they can actually be complementary.
How so?
Think of it like this. Stronger IP protection makes a potential prize the rent for a big breakthrough. Bigger. That's the carrot. But stronger competition means if you don't innovate, you're more likely to get wiped out by rivals. That's the stick. For frontier firms, both can actually push them harder to innovate.
So you need both, but regulated. So the IP rents don't just create permanent monopolies that kill competition.
Exactly. Regulation is key to keeping that cycle going. Then there's funding it all.
Venture capital for the startups.
Yep, crucial for the really disruptive stuff. Bigger firms use internal cash or institutional investors more, but there's always this tension. Investors are scared of backing a loser.
The type I error, right.
Yeah.
Funding something that fails.
Right, which can lead them to be too cautious, underfunding the really bold, risky ideas that might have the biggest payoff.
Though the book notes that during those big GPT diffusions like electricity or IT, you get these waves of financial excitement.
Yeah, figure 12. A shows peaks in IPOs companies going public. That kind of, maybe irrational exuberance can actually be helpful in getting money to flow to new risky ventures.
And globalization throws another layer on top.
Absolutely. It speeds up the flow of everything, goods, ideas, people. The China shock is a big example they discuss.
Where rising imports from China hit U.S. manufacturing jobs hard in some areas, figure 13.2 shows that correlation.
It did, but the book's point is the effect wasn't uniform. It hurt firms that were already struggling, far from the cutting edge. But for firms that were innovative and competitive,
It spurred them on, like a new competitor making you raise your game.
kind of, and access to global markets through exports can also drive innovation, especially for those frontier firms. A French study they cite found that.
So the answer isn't protectionism, according to the authors.
No, they argue the key to competing globally is investing in your own capacity for innovation and quality. They compare Germany and France's ability to produce and export COVID-related goods early in the pandemic.
Figure 13.11.
Right. Germany's prior investments apparently pay off. They also stress the positive impact of skilled immigration on innovation, citing historical U.S. examples.
Okay, this leads to what they call the golden triangle. State, market, civil society. How do they fit together to manage all this?
It's about the interplay. First, the state has to be an investor, especially in basic research.
The stuff markets won't fund because it's too long-term or uncertain.
Exactly. Universities, public research agencies like NSF or NIH in the U.S., Figure 12.1 shows a link between government spending on higher education and university rankings. Plus, general education, they mention Jules Ferry's reforms in France and infrastructure. These are public goods that enable private innovation. Sometimes competition between countries or even conflict pushes states to invest more.
Okay, investor. What else?
Ensure. The state provides the safety nets. The welfare state grew partly to cushion the blows from economic disruption. The Danish flexicurity model is a prime example.
Right, flexibility and security. Tell us more about that.
It means labor markets are flexible. Firms can adjust their workforce relatively easily, which helps creative destruction work. But workers have strong support, good unemployment benefits, serious help with retraining, finding new jobs. It shifts the focus from protecting a specific job to protecting the worker and their ability to stay employed. Employment security, not job security.
That makes sense. What about recessions?
The state acts as an insurer there, too, through countercyclical policy. Think Keynes, the New Deal, stepping in with spending or support when the economy tanks. This is vital because otherwise good, innovative firms might slash R&D just because credit tightens up.
And having your fiscal house in order helps.
Definitely. The book suggests countries with more budgetary discipline before a crisis can respond more strongly during one. They contrast Germany's COVID stimulus with France's figure 14.3, making that point.
A crucial piece for this whole triangle to work, they say, is limiting executive power. Why is that so important?
To prevent collusion, basically. Powerful incumbent firms will always try to cozy up to the government to get protection, block new entrants, and stop creative destruction that threatens them.
So you need checks and balances.
Constitutional checks, separation of powers, an independent judiciary. Judicial independence, the data suggests, is linked to better property rights protection and making it easier to start a new business, both vital.
Though judges aren't perfectly neutral either.
No, the book acknowledges that. Political bias, media pressure, even algorithmic bias. Impartiality has limits.
Which brings us to the third point of the triangle.
Civil society, active, watchful citizens, NGOs, independent groups, they're essential to make sure those constitutional guarantees actually mean something.
They hold power accountable.
Yes. Think of the civil rights movement pushing for change against entrenched systems, or, conversely, the Yellow Vests in France, partly a reaction to policies pushed through without broad public buy-in. Ignoring civil society is risky.
And a free press.
Crucial. Independent media acts as a counterpower, bringing things to light. They mention the doctors in Wuhan, like Li Wenliang, trying to warn about COVID early on, and the suppression of that information. That highlights the danger when information flow is controlled.
So bringing it all together, the argument is that innovation and protection can coexist. You can have a dynamic and inclusive capitalism.
That's the goal of the better capitalism they describe. And they point to examples suggesting it's possible.
Like Denmark again.
Denmark's flexicurity shows you can have high innovation alongside low inequality. Sweden's tax reforms boosted innovation without blowing up overall inequality, even if top shares rose a bit.
Even the U.S., with Obamacare, took steps towards more protection, trying to decouple healthcare from specific jobs, which can hinder mobility.
Right, and the broader historical trend in developed countries, they argue, has been towards becoming more protective and inclusive over time, often pushed by civil society unions, social movements demanding change.
Okay, so to wrap up the key message from this deep dive, creative destruction is this incredibly powerful engine for growth, essential really, but it's also inherently disruptive.
Very disruptive. So building a better, more inclusive capitalism isn't about stopping it. You can't and you wouldn't want to lose the growth. It's about managing the process, mitigating the downsides.
And that requires getting that golden triangle working. The state investing and ensuring, markets driving competition and innovation, and civil society keeping everyone honest and pushing for inclusion. It's a dynamic balancing act.
Right. Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe something for you to consider. Technology is accelerating this process like never before. AI, biotech, you name it. Things are changing faster and faster.
So the question is,
how do we make sure our institutions, our policies, our safety nets, that whole management system can adapt quickly enough? How do we harness all this amazing innovation for the benefit of everyone while managing the disruption so people aren't just left behind? How do we build that better capitalism in real time?
and what's your part in making that happen?